An old road, not very busy at night, cuts through the interior of a city with buildings preserved from the last century. The region was once a crossing point for drovers and travelers heading to other cities, and many stories were told about strange events along the way. On a cold morning, after a long day of work, the journey home goes smoothly. Fog covered part of the road, and only the headlights illuminated the lonely path. Halfway along the route, a movement on the shoulder caught our attention. A tall man, wearing a dark coat and holding a hat in his hands, was standing near a bend. His calm expression and upright posture gave the impression of someone just waiting for a ride. I slowed down, and a closer look revealed something curious. The man wore period clothes, well aligned, as if he had come from an ancient event. Even with the unusual situation, I stopped the car and asked if I needed help. He didn't say anything, just nodded yes. As soon as the door was unlocked, the passenger entered the vehicle without hesitation and sat in the passenger seat. The journey was in silence for a few minutes. The man stared straight ahead, showing no emotion. When trying to start a conversation, few words were said in a low and slow voice. "I need to get to the city center. My family is waiting for me." The road remained empty, and the feeling of discomfort increased with each kilometer. Something about the passenger's presence didn't feel right. The rearview mirror reflected the image of the completely empty back seat, even though I was sure there was someone sitting there. A shiver ran through the entire body. With just a few minutes left to reach the destination, a quick look to the side confirmed what instinct already indicated. The passenger was no longer in the car. The door was still locked, and the seat belt was still fastened, but the seat was completely empty. Upon arriving in the city, a search for information led to an unsettling discovery. Reports about a man hitchhiking on that same road had been known for years. Witnesses always described the same appearance, the same clothes, and the same phrase said during the journey. An old newspaper kept in the local library revealed the last clue in the mystery. A photo of a man, with the same dark coat and hat in his hands, illustrated an article about a former resident who never managed to return home. Since then, on some early mornings, he still waits for someone willing to give him a ride to the city center. In an old building in the city center with a weathered brick facade and old wooden windows, an apartment on the 32nd floor was available for rent. The building, built in the 1950s, exuded a nostalgic atmosphere, with narrow hallways, reinforced wooden doors, and a creaky elevator. Despite its decaying appearance, the building housed stories and secrets of its former residents. Louisa, a young writer in search of inspiration and a peaceful home, saw apartment 32 as a chance to start her life over again. The rental price was affordable, the location was perfect, and the view of the city was breathtaking. The move occurred without any unexpected events, and the property manager, a burly middle-aged man with a friendly smile, handed him the keys to the apartment, explaining how the building operated and mentioning the history of the closets built into the rooms, where many former residents left objects behind. The first few days in apartment 32 were peaceful. Louisa was enchanted by the view of the city, the brightness of the apartment, and the stillness of the building. She decorated the space with her books, plants, and personal objects, creating a welcoming and inspiring environment. At night, Louisa sat at the kitchen table, writing on her laptop and listening to classical music. The silence was interrupted only by the distant sound of cars on the street and the creaking of the elevator. One night, while working on her new book, Louisa heard a strange noise coming from her room. A light scratch, as if nails were scraping on wood, echoed through the room. She was scared, but thought it could be the wind or some furniture moving. The following night, the sound returned, louder and clearer. Louisa realized that the noise was coming from inside the closet built into the room. Curious, she took the key that the building manager had given her and opened the closet. Inside, there were only dusty shelves and a yellowed envelope at the bottom. Louisa opened the envelope and found a bundle of papers with handwritten notes, written hastily and with shaky handwriting. The notes reported sleepless nights, strange sounds coming from the hallway, and the feeling of always being accompanied inside the apartment. There were also reports of a reclusive man who had lived in apartment 32 many years ago and who, before moving in, had left a notice to the building manager saying that the closet key should never be used. Intrigued by the notes, Louisa decided to research the former resident of apartment 32. She discovered that he was a man called Arthur, who had moved to the building in the 60s. He was a talented writer, but also a lonely and eccentric man. Arthur spent hours locked in his apartment, writing and reading. He rarely left the house and avoided contact with his neighbors. In the following days, the phenomena intensified. The closet opened on its own during the early hours of the morning, lights flashed without explanation and objects moved around. Louisa began to feel horrified and to have nightmares about the former resident of apartment 32. One night, while walking down the hallway, Louisa saw a figure cross the hallway and stop in front of the bedroom door. She got scared and ran into the apartment, locking the door. Determined to understand what was happening, Louisa began to investigate the past of the building and apartment 32. She spoke to the oldest residents, read old documents and researched online archives. He discovered that Arthur had a fascination with ghost stories and paranormal phenomena. He believed that apartment 32 was haunted by spirits and that the built-in closet was a portal to another dimension. Arthur spent sleepless nights trying to contact the spirits that inhabited the apartment, using strange methods and performing macabre rituals. Louisa discovered that Arthur had left a notice to the property manager before disappearing. The warning said that the key to the cupboard should never be used, as the cupboard harbored a terrible secret. The warning also said that Arthur had awakened an evil force that now haunted apartment 32 and that this force was waiting to be released. Terrified by the discovery of Arthur's warning, Louisa didn't know what to do. If you locked the closet, you could be imprisoning the evil force forever, but if you opened the closet, you could be releasing that force into the world. Louisa spent sleepless nights thinking about what to do. I knew I needed to make a decision, but I didn't know which one was right. One night, Louisa woke up to a strange noise inside her room. He got up and went to the closet. The closet door was open and a dim light was coming from inside. Louisa approached the closet and saw a shadowy figure at the bottom. The figure turned to her and Louisa saw Arthur's face. He was pale and his eyes were red with fury. "You shouldn't have opened the closet," Arthur said in a hoarse voice. "Now, you will pay for your curiosity." Arthur advanced towards Louisa, who screamed and took 2 steps back. She tripped and fell to the floor. Arthur approached her, raising his hand to strike her. Suddenly, a bright light shone into the room and Arthur disappeared. Louisa got up and saw a luminous spirit in Arthur's place. The spirit smiled at her and disappeared. Louisa ran out of the apartment, leaving the door open. She never went back there. Apartment 32 remained empty for many years. No one else dared to rent that cursed place. Some say that Arthur's spirit still haunts the apartment, waiting to exact revenge on anyone who dares desecrate his secret. Others say that the evil force he awakened has been released and now roams the world, causing terror and destruction. Louisa never wrote a book again. She moved to a distant city and lived a lonely life haunted by fear. The key to locker 32 remains lost, forever keeping the secret of what happened in that cursed apartment. On the quiet Rua das Acacias, an old house stood out. Built in 1920, the 2-story wooden house exuded mystery. Its former residents, the Oliveira family, had left decades ago, leaving behind only echoes of stories and an air of melancholy. A group of young adventurers, curious about the house's past, decided to explore it. Armed with flashlights and cameras, they entered the abandoned house. The silence was unsettling, broken only by the creaking of the floorboards and the rustling of the wind through the broken windows. In the main hall, an old piano caught our attention. A soft and haunting melody seemed to emanate from the instrument, making the hairs on the backs of the young people's necks stand up. Going up the stairs, they found a children's room. Old toys and a dusty crib created an unsettling atmosphere. Suddenly, the lights flickered and an intense cold took over the room. A shadow moved quickly in the corner of the room, and whispers echoed, unintelligible words that gave the young people goosebumps. One of them felt an icy touch on his shoulder, and a scream of terror cut through the silence. Terrified, the young people fled the house, leaving behind the feeling that something inexplicable had happened. As they left, they noticed that the house seemed to be watching them, with its dark windows like eyes. The next day, they returned to Rua das Acacias, but the house was no longer there. In its place, there was just an empty lot, as if the house had never existed. Intrigued, they searched for information about the Oliveira family, but found no records. The house on Misty Hill was gone, taking its secrets with it. As the young people walked away, an old gardener, who took care of the land next door, watched them with an enigmatic smile. He knew the truth about the house, but he kept it to himself. The house on Misty Hill was not gone. She had merely returned to her original state, a reminder of a forgotten past, a place where time did not exist and secrets remained hidden. Night shifts at a conservation clinic were always peaceful. The old building, built in the 1940s, once served as a hospital and, later, as an asylum. The long, silent corridors hold stories from different times, but nothing that has caught attention over the years. During one round, around 3 in the morning, something different happened. As he passed through the second-floor corridor, a muffled noise came from the end of the corridor. Upon checking the rooms, everything seemed in order. However, a door that always remained locked was ajar. It was a room that had been in use for years, used only for storage. The light from the hallway partially illuminated the space, revealing furniture covered in dusty sheets. In the corner of the room, an antique armchair and a small table meant that, one day, that space would already be occupied. A cold wind passed through the corridor, causing an instant shiver. The feeling of being watched grew with every second. Upon leaving the room, a figure quickly passed through the hallway, heading towards the stairs. The first reaction was to call out for the unexpected visitor, but the only response was absolute silence. As I walked down the stairs, a disturbing detail caught my attention. The front door, always locked at night, was unlocked. The possible entry of an intruder gave me goosebumps, but I had to find out. I was alone at that moment. I looked around, but there were no signs of a break-in. Security cameras were checked, and it was at that moment that something strange happened. At exactly 2:58 a.m., an image captured the figure of an advanced old man walking down the second-floor hallway. He was wearing an old robe and walking slowly, as if he were at home. Upon arriving in front of the deactivated room, he stopped, looked directly at the camera and disappeared in the next instant. The next day, when reporting what happened, one of the oldest nurses said that room belonged to one of the first patients in the place, when it still operated as an asylum. The man, according to records, used to walk around the building in the early hours of the morning and always returned to that room. No one has seen the visitor since then, but every morning, at 2:58 a.m., the door to the old room opens by itself. A small wooden house, built in the 1960s, located on a quiet country street, has always attracted attention for its old and well-preserved appearance. Despite the welcoming atmosphere during the day, something different took over the atmosphere at dusk. Reports of strange noises and inexplicable sensations were already part of the stories told by older residents. The move to the location took place without any receipt. The property was in good condition and seemed ideal for a new phase of life. In the first few days, everything went normally. Just the natural creak of the wooden floor and the creak of furniture throughout the night. Nothing out of the ordinary. On the third night, something different happened. During the early hours of the morning, an almost imperceptible whisper came from the corridor. The first reaction was to think it was the wind coming through the cracks in the window, but when I got up to check, the sound became clearer. Disjointed words, spoken in a low, inconvenient tone, came from the end of the corridor, near the attic. The attic has never been explored since arrival. A small wooden door in the ceiling looked like it hadn't been opened in years. However, that night, it was ajar. The temperature in the hallway seemed colder than the rest of the house, and a faint smell of aged wood filled the air. At dawn, a decision was made: check the attic. With a flashlight in hand, I pulled the retractable ladder and opened the door, revealing a small space, full of old boxes and furniture covered in dusty sheets. In the far corner, something different caught attention. An old rocking chair near the wall looked out of place. As I approached, a brown-covered journal was on the seat. The yellowed pages contained notes written decades ago. Reports of sleepless nights, appearances in the hallway, and the constant feeling of being watched. The last note was dated 1983 and simply said, "You were not alone." Even though I was intrigued and a little scared, I went back to my room and slept. That same night, the voices returned, closer than before. This time, it wasn't just disjointed words. A single sentence was whispered clearly at the bedside: "Leave before it's too late." I woke up scared, looked around the room, didn't see anyone. I ran up and went to the kitchen, and sat there until dawn. During those hours I spent sitting in the kitchen. I heard footsteps, voices that sounded like someone grumbling. I saw figures in the corners of my eyes. The next morning, the decision to leave home was significant. When talking to former residents of the region, a little-known story came to light. Decades ago, a man lived alone on that property for many years, always reclusive and avoiding any contact with neighbors. Some people said that, shortly before he moved, they commented that he said he was no longer alone at home. Since then, the property has been empty. But every night, some lights can still be seen burning in the attic, even when no one is there.